David Smith here with another Flip Classroom math lesson. 3 tips before we start. Remember that you can adjust the playback speed if that helps you work through the video. You can also pause the video at any point to take notes or jot down questions. Lastly, you can turn on the captions so you can read my words go by on the screen. Okay, today's topic, more work with limits and technology. But I'm going to start this one on the whiteboard and then we'll jump into Desmos. So let's take a look at a new function. The limit as x approaches 0 of 1 plus x over 1 over x. And we know we can't do direct substitution because this term, our exponent here, will be undefined. So we can't do direct substitution. So in a manual method, I could just make my t-chart here and put in 2 values that are very close to 0 from either side. Okay? And when I do that on my calculator, this is what I get. So when I put in minus 0.001, I get 2.719 blah, blah, blah. When I put in positive 0.001, I get this number. Now, what is the limit here? It's a little bit hard to see what this is approaching. So there's a real simple trick for figuring out what the limit is. Let's just take the average. It's got to be right between these. That's a good bet because these are the same distance away from 0. So what I've done here is I've set up that calculation. What I'd like you to do, pause the video, do this simple calculation, and then tell me what you see there. There's more than just the result of the math in this one. Okay, now if you put this in your calculator correctly, what you're going to get is 2.71882830.5. Now what is that? You should be thinking, geez, that looks an awful lot like E. And you're right, this is E. Now if you recall back, we watched a video in class where we looked at this as one of the possible definitions of the number E. So it's not surprising that when we take the limit as x goes to 0, get those numbers, average them, we end up with E. Okay, here I am in my on my Zoom recording. Basically, that's what I use here. And let's pop over into Desmos real quick and take a look at that same problem. Okay, here I am in Desmos, and let's go ahead and recreate that table of values. So here we go. Go ahead and put in my table. And again, what I have to do is up here, select my Y1 and write my function in here so that the table will automatically calculate basically my f of x values. I'm going to go ahead and put the function here, and that's just parentheses x. Now once I've typed my x, I can just hit the 1 on the keyboard, and presto, the sub 1 shows up in there. You need to have that so that your function will do the correct calculation. Okay, and this is actually 1 plus x sub 1, closing parentheses. I'm going to type my caret for the exponent, and now I'm going to do 1 over x sub 1. So there's my function. Just to verify, let's put in 0 for x1, and sure enough, we get our undefined, which is what we didn't want, or it prevents us from evaluating the function. So let's go ahead and put in that series of numbers. Approaching from the left, minus 0.1, minus 0.01, and then finally minus 0.001. And you can already see that f of x is approaching E. Let's do it from the positive side. That would be 0.1, 0.01, and then finally 0.001. So this gives me those 2 values that I have. I have from the whiteboard, we were just up there a minute ago. I have this one, and then I have this one. And at this point, you could pull out your calculator real quick and take the average of those 2, and that would show you E. And here, let's zoom in on the graph just a little bit. You can see how we're passing through. Our function is decreasing, and right there is where E is going to be, and it's where our function's undefined. So just for grins, I'm going to go ahead and add the expression for our function instead of our table. So this would be f of x equals parentheses 1 plus x parentheses caret 1 over x. There's our function, and that's cruising right along. It maps right to the points that we entered in our table, and it pretty much just shows us the relationship here as x approaches 0 in this function, f of x approaches E. Okay, let's take a look at one more function. I know there are some trig functions in the exercise problems, so let's take a look at one of those. I'm going to put the function in first. So f of x is going to be equal sine x over x. And here's our nice little graph of that function. Let's zoom out just a little bit. This is very similar to the sine function. We've just done a little bit of a vertical translation. And so let's take a peek at the table of values. What we're going to do is evaluate the limit of this function as x approaches 0. So we know you can't plug 0 in directly because it would be undefined. Let's pop in a quick Desmos table here. Change my y1 to my function, which is sine x sub 1 over x sub 1. There's my my function in my table. And then, of course, let's just confirm, yep, we put 0 in, we get undefined. So now let's approach from the left, negative 0.1. There's our f of x, negative 0.01. And then finally, negative 0.001. So looks pretty much like we're approaching 1. And I think if you're paying attention and you follow along here, you're going to see that that is indeed what's going on. Let's approach from the right. So that would be 0.1, 0.01, one more, 0.001. Now it looks to me like this is approaching the same value. We've got 6 9s and an 8 3, so 0.9999983 from both sides. Pretty clear we're approaching 1. And if we zoom in on our graph, we can see that indeed the graph is approaching 1 as x is 0. Finally, again, my complaint about Desmos here is that they won't put an open circle around the point at which this function is undefined. My guess is that programmatically in this application, that's a little difficult to do. Not sure why, but technically the graph here is incorrect. It's a discontinuous function. It's undefined when x is 0. So there should be an open circle there. Just remember, when you're sketching graphs for our class, that is important. You do need to have that in there to get full points on your answer. Now that you've watched the video, take a minute to jot down notes or questions that you might have for our next class. You can also re-watch portions of the video that didn't sink in the first time. If you enjoyed the video, please click like, and if you'd like to help me grow my YouTube channel, please click subscribe.